The alarm rang out at 6:30 a.m., filling our bedroom with its familiar buzzing sound. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the stiffness in my shoulders and a dull ache in my lower back. With a reluctant sigh, I stretched my arms and legs, trying to shake off the weight of fatigue that seemed to settle over me like a heavy blanket. Beside me, my wife Emily was already stirring. She tossed her dark hair to the side and squinted against the early morning light filtering through the blinds. "You're groaning like an old man, Will," she teased, flashing a sleepy smile as she threw back the covers and padded toward the bathroom. I chuckled, the weariness momentarily lifting. "Maybe it's because you wore me out last night," I replied, managing a smirk. Emily's laughter echoed from the bathroom, a sound that had once been my favorite in the world. Emily and I had been married for 8 years. We lived in a comfortable 2-story home in Raleigh, North Carolina, where she had recently accepted a position as a project manager for a growing tech company. I worked as a civil engineer, designing sustainable infrastructure for the city's expanding suburbs. Both of us had demanding careers, but we managed to keep things lively between us. Our date nights were frequent, and our weekends were spent with friends or on short getaways to the mountains or the coast. The memories of our early days together felt vivid. Dinners at local restaurants, spontaneous road trips, and countless rounds of golf, a shared passion we both enjoyed. Today marked a new milestone in Emily's career. She was headed to Austin, Texas, for a week-long client meeting. It was her first major business trip since she'd started her new role, and while I was proud of her, a small part of me dreaded the silence that would fill the house. I wasn't used to being alone for so long. She'd be gone for nearly a week, and the thought of evenings without her was a bit unsettling. Despite her upcoming departure, Emily moved with her usual energy, her presence filling the room as she emerged from the bathroom, towel wrapped around her. "Come on, lazy bones," she said, giving my shoulder a gentle nudge. "Time to get up and start the day. Bills don't pay themselves, you know." I forced myself out of bed, chuckling as I made my way to the bathroom. By the time I returned, Emily was already downstairs, preparing breakfast. She had this easy rhythm to her mornings: coffee first, toast next, and always with a sprinkle of cinnamon on her oatmeal. I joined her, settling into the chair opposite her as she sipped her coffee and scanned the day's news on her phone. We shared a few moments in silence, punctuated by casual comments about the upcoming week. I mentioned an upcoming project review, and she shared a little about the intense negotiations she'd be handling. She had worked hard to earn this position, and though her demanding schedule meant less time together, I was genuinely happy to see her succeeding. After we finished our breakfasts, I helped her load her suitcase into the car and kissed her goodbye in the driveway. "Take care, Em," I said, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. She smiled, her eyes softening. "Don't miss me too much, Will. I'll be back before you know it." As she pulled out of the driveway and headed down the road, a familiar feeling settled over me, a quiet mix of love and a pang of something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't exactly loneliness, but rather a subtle reminder of how intertwined our lives were. As I watched her car disappear around the corner, I turned and headed back into the house, steeling myself for a long week ahead. The drive to my office in downtown Raleigh was uneventful, the morning sun casting a soft glow over the tree-lined streets. Work was a welcome distraction. As a civil engineer, my days were filled with blueprints, site plans, and endless meetings with contractors and city planners. Today's agenda included finalizing designs for a new community center on the city's north side. I spent the morning buried in calculations, reviewing specifications, and coordinating with my project manager, Paul, who was more than a little frazzled from a recent string of deadlines. By noon, I'd finally settled into the rhythm of my work when my phone buzzed on my desk. A quick glance revealed it was Paul, our project manager. "Hey, Will," he said, his voice sounding slightly stressed as usual. "Can you step into my office for a quick chat?" "Sure thing, Paul." "Be right there," I replied, setting down my coffee and grabbing my notebook. As I entered his office, he gestured to the chair across from his desk, his fingers tapping a familiar rhythm on his laptop. "I know it's a last-minute thing," he began, glancing up with an apologetic look, "but we got a small issue with a project out in Charleston. One of our site engineers is out with the flu, and the client needs someone with experience on site. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Charleston, huh? Well, I don't have much going on here this week with Emily out of town, so it sounds doable. Paul's face brightened. That's the spirit. I'll have Denise book your flights. You'll be there by tomorrow morning, and with luck, you can wrap things up and be back here by Thursday. As I left his office, a spark of excitement flickered within me. The idea of a brief trip to Charleston wasn't bad at all. If I wrapped things up quickly, I could even surprise Emily on my way back and spend a couple of extra days with her in Austin. The thought of a quiet dinner with her in a new city, away from work and routines, brought a smile to my face. I called Emily as soon as I left the office, wanting to tell her about my change of plans. To my surprise, she didn't pick up. I left a message telling her I'd be in Charleston for a day or two and that we'd catch up in the evenings. That night, I packed a small bag and settled down in front of the television with a frozen dinner, my mind drifting between thoughts of work and Emily. Just as I was about to turn in, my phone buzzed. It was Emily, finally calling me back. "Hey," I answered, my voice a bit sleepy. "Hey, Will," she said, her voice soft and comforting. "Sorry, I missed your call earlier. I just got back to the hotel after a long day." "It's all good," I replied. "I'll be in Charleston for work for a day or two. Figured I'd let you know in case I couldn't call during the day." "Oh, that's a surprise," she said, sounding genuinely pleased. "Make sure you get some rest, okay?" We talked for a few minutes more before saying goodnight, exchanging the usual "I love you" that felt as natural as breathing. As I lay in bed, I felt a flicker of anticipation at the thought of surprising her, imagining the look on her face when I showed up unexpectedly. I drifted off to sleep with thoughts of her smile and the faint scent of her perfume lingering in my mind. The next morning, I was on a plane to Charleston, feeling a renewed sense of energy as I arrived and set about tackling the client's issues. The day passed quickly, and by evening I was back at my hotel, tired but satisfied with the progress. Tomorrow, I would wrap things up and then, if all went smoothly, head to Austin to surprise Emily. I tried calling her again before bed, but once again there was no answer. Shrugging it off, I left another message, telling her I'd call again the next day. As I turned off the lights, a small voice in the back of my mind wondered why she hadn't called back. But I brushed the thought away, convincing myself that it was just another long day for her. Tomorrow, I would see her in Austin, and everything would fall into place. Or so I thought. After a long day in Charleston, I was more than ready to wrap things up and catch my flight to Austin. The client's issue had been resolved by mid-morning, leaving me a few hours to gather my things, check out of the hotel, and grab a quick lunch before heading to the airport. I managed to book a last-minute flight that would land in Austin around 9:30 p.m., plenty of time to surprise Emily at her hotel. As I waited for my flight, I tried calling her again. Once more, there was no answer. I left another voicemail, trying to sound casual. "Hey, Em. Just letting you know I'll be staying with my parents for a day or two after Charleston. Call me when you have a chance." Though I tried to stay relaxed, her silence tugged at me. Emily was usually so prompt about returning my calls, even during business trips. I reassured myself that she was simply busy with her meetings, and the excitement of seeing her soon overshadowed my concerns. I boarded the plane, feeling a quiet thrill as I imagined the look on her face when she saw me. Emily loved surprises, and I'd always enjoyed catching her off guard with little romantic gestures. I pictured us having a quiet dinner together, maybe even stealing a night away from the hustle of our regular lives. For the first time in days, I felt truly content. The flight landed on time, and I grabbed a cab to her hotel. The city lights of Austin flickered past the window, and I let myself relax, anticipating the evening. By the time I arrived at her hotel, it was almost 10 p.m. I checked in at the front desk, explaining that I was there to surprise my wife and requesting a spare key to her room. The receptionist looked a bit surprised, but after checking my ID, she handed me a card with a polite smile. As I stepped into the elevator, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. When I reached her floor, I found her door and took a steadying breath before quietly swiping the card and stepping inside. The room was dimly lit, a single lamp casting a warm glow over the neatly made bed. Her laptop sat closed on the desk, and a few of her things were scattered around: a notebook, a coffee cup, and her familiar leather travel bag. I glanced around, expecting to see her reading in bed or maybe brushing her teeth in the bathroom. But the room was empty. My heart skipped a beat. I checked my watch. It was late enough that she should be back from any work meetings or dinners with her team. A small sliver of worry crept in as I sat down on the edge of the bed, glancing at the clock on the bedside table. I decided to wait a little longer, hoping she'd be back any minute. But as the minutes ticked by, a sense of unease settled over me. Finally, I got up and wandered into the adjoining suite's small living area, where I spotted a door that connected to the neighboring suite. It was slightly ajar. Curiosity nudged at me, and I approached the door, pushing it open quietly. The room beyond was dimly lit, just like Emily's, with only the faintest sounds filtering through: a muffled laugh, then a low, familiar voice that made my stomach twist. I stepped further into the suite, my heart pounding as I reached the doorway to the bedroom. Through the shadows, I saw a figure I immediately recognized. Emily, her silhouette unmistakable. But she wasn't alone. Beside her, a man lounged casually on the bed, his face obscured from view, but his posture relaxed and familiar. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut, my chest tightening as a wave of shock and disbelief washed over me. I felt rooted to the spot, my mind racing as I tried to process what I was seeing. My first instinct was to storm into the room, to demand answers, to confront her. But something held me back, a voice of reason amidst the chaos, urging me to stay calm. Instead, I took a shaky breath, quietly stepping back and returning to her room. My hands shook as I fumbled with the camera in my bag, a small, digital one we'd often used to capture our travels and weekends together. Adjusting the settings, I turned off the flash and carefully approached the doorway once again. With a steady hand, I raised the camera, capturing a few discreet photos of the scene in the next room. They were unaware of my presence, lost in their own world as I documented what felt like the end of mine. Once I had the proof I needed, I slowly backed away, retreating to the empty space of her suite. The quiet around me felt deafening, each breath a struggle as I fought to keep my emotions in check. I sank into the chair at the desk, my mind a blur, trying to comprehend the weight of what I'd just witnessed. Before leaving, I did one final thing. I connected the camera to her laptop, uploading one of the images to her desktop. I set it as her wallpaper, a final message that would reveal the truth in the starkest way possible. With a heavy heart, I picked up my bag, quietly exited her suite, and returned the key card to the front desk. The receptionist gave me a curious look, but I offered no explanation as I walked out into the cool night air, my mind numb and my heart shattered. Back at the airport, I managed to book a last-minute flight back home. It was scheduled for 6:00 a.m., just a few hours away. I checked into a nearby motel to wait for the flight, though sleep was impossible. The image of Emily with another man replayed in my mind, each time bringing a fresh wave of pain and disbelief. By dawn, I was on the plane, the world outside the window blurred in gray. I felt hollow, the future I'd imagined with Emily now replaced by a vast, empty space. I hadn't yet figured out what I would do next, but one thing was certain. I would not be there to greet her when she returned to Rayleigh. Upon landing, I powered on my phone. Almost immediately, it began to buzz with missed calls and texts from Emily. I ignored them, unable to bear the thought of speaking to her. I went home only briefly, enough time to pack my belongings and rent a storage unit. I would be gone before she ever set foot in the house again. As I packed, I decided I would start the process of filing for divorce immediately. There was no turning back. The woman I'd loved and trusted had betrayed me in a way I could never forgive. When I finally left the house, I drove to my parents' place, seeking the comfort and understanding that only family could offer. I knew this would be one of the hardest conversations I'd ever have, but I also knew I wouldn't be facing it alone. By the time I reached my parents' house, the reality of everything that had happened finally began to sink in. My childhood home stood like a quiet sanctuary in the early morning light, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of emotions raging inside me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself as I stepped out of the car, the weight of my bags a reminder of the life I'd be leaving behind. As I opened the front door, my mother looked up from the kitchen, a mixture of surprise and worry on her face. "Will, what are you doing here so early? Where's Emily?" She set down the dish she'd been washing and walked toward me, her eyes scanning my face with the instinctual concern only a mother could have. I could barely muster a response, my voice thick with emotion. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you and Dad." My father appeared in the hallway, his brow furrowed as he took in the sight of me, disheveled and clearly distraught. We settled into the living room, and I recounted the events of the past 24 hours, my words coming out in halting fragments as I relived the pain. I told them everything, about finding Emily with someone else, about the plans we'd made, and how it all came crashing down in one unexpected moment. My mother gasped, her hand covering her mouth, while my father sat in silence, a grim expression settling over his features. When I finished, there was a heavy pause, the weight of my words lingering in the room like a shadow. "I'm so sorry, son," my father finally said, his voice a low rumble. "I can't imagine what you're going through, but you know we're here for you. Whatever you need." My mother reached out, squeezing my hand. "Will, you don't have to face this alone. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need." The reassurance brought a small measure of comfort, and I nodded, grateful for their support. For the first time in hours, I felt a sliver of stability, even as my world continued to crumble around me. As the morning turned to afternoon, I left the house briefly to finalize some practical matters. First, I went to a storage unit to unload my things, knowing I couldn't bring myself to return to the home Emily and I shared. Each box I stacked in the storage space felt like a piece of my life being tucked away, a tangible reminder of a past I couldn't bear to face. Afterward, I drove to my lawyer's office to initiate the divorce process. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile, unaware of the turmoil within me. After a short wait, I was ushered into the lawyer's office, a stark, neatly organized room that seemed indifferent to the messiness of my personal life. My lawyer, Mr. Higgins, was an older gentleman with a calm, reassuring demeanor. He listened attentively as I explained my situation, nodding with a sympathetic frown as I described Emily's betrayal. "Will," he said, his voice measured, "this is undoubtedly a difficult time. We can proceed with an uncontested divorce based on irreconcilable differences, which should be relatively quick. Or, if you prefer, we can pursue a divorce citing infidelity. This may take longer, but it would allow us to use evidence to your advantage should any disputes arise." I thought about the photographs I'd taken in Austin, and the urge for retribution flared up within me, but after a moment's consideration, I shook my head. "No, I just want this to be over. Irreconcilable differences will do." He nodded, making a few notes. "Understood. I'll draft the paperwork and file it immediately. We'll arrange for Emily to be served as soon as possible." With that settled, I left his office, feeling a strange sense of finality. I was beginning the process of disentangling myself from the life Emily and I had built, step by step. Back at my parents' house, I found a sense of solace in their quiet support. My mother cooked a comforting dinner, the familiar sense of home-cooked food filling the air as we gathered around the table. It was a stark contrast to the cold formality of my lawyer's office, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel grounded in the simple act of sharing a meal. As the hours passed, my phone began to ring again. Emily had been trying to reach me all day, her calls and messages growing increasingly frantic. I had ignored her so far, but now with my family around me, I felt a strange detachment from the pain. I decided to let her leave a message on the answering machine, a small act of closure. The phone rang once more, and this time I let it go to voicemail. Her voice echoed through the room, tinged with a desperation that was hard to ignore. "Well, please pick up. I know you're there. Just talk to me. I don't know what happened, or how you found out, but please, I'm sorry. I need to explain." Her words trailed off, replaced by a quiet sob, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I looked at my parents, their faces etched with sympathy, and nodded, signaling that I wanted to let it go. By the time the message ended, a heavy silence had settled over the room. My father gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. You don't have to listen to her, Will. You've done the right thing. That night, I slept fitfully, the images of Emily and her lover replaying in my mind. But the sorrow was tempered by a newfound determination to rebuild my life, to find a sense of purpose beyond the hurt. The next day, I returned to my own house, now a shell of what it had once meant to me. The rooms were silent and still, devoid of the warmth and laughter that Emily and I had once shared. I moved through the house like a stranger, taking in the remnants of our life together. Framed photos on the walls, the faint scent of her perfume, a forgotten coffee mug on the counter, they all seemed like relics of a life that was slipping further away. I spent the morning packing up more of my personal belongings, methodically placing them into boxes that I would soon take to storage. With each item, I felt a sense of closure, as though I was shedding the weight of memories that no longer served me. As I finished packing, I heard a car pull up outside. My heart skipped a beat, knowing it could only be one person. I took a deep breath and braced myself as the front door opened and Emily stepped inside. She looked different, tired, worn down, her usually bright eyes dulled by the strain of the past few days. She froze when she saw me, her face a mixture of relief and dread. Will, please, I just need a chance to explain. I stood there, arms crossed, keeping my expression as neutral as I could. There's nothing to explain, Emily. I saw everything. Her face crumpled, and she took a shaky step forward. It wasn't what it looked like. It was a mistake. A stupid, terrible mistake. I never meant to hurt you. I clenched my jaw, fighting to keep my voice steady. A mistake? That's what you call it? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I was stressed. The project, the meetings. It just happened. I shook my head, unable to contain the anger bubbling up inside me. You didn't just happen to betray me, Emily. You made a choice. You chose to destroy everything we built together. Her shoulders slumped, her gaze dropping to the floor. Well, please, I'm begging you. Let me make it right. There's no making this right, I replied coldly. It's over, Emily. I've already filed for divorce. She let out a choked sob, sinking to the floor, her hands covering her face. I felt a pang of pity, a reminder of the love I once held for her. But that love had been shattered, replaced by a hollow ache that I knew would take a long time to heal. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her to confront the reality of her choices. Months passed after that final, painful confrontation with Emily. The divorce moved forward quickly. There was little to argue over, as I had made the decision to leave the house and most of our shared belongings to her. My lawyer had been thorough and efficient, and in what felt like no time at all, the papers were signed, officially ending our 8-year marriage. In the aftermath, I threw myself into my work. Projects kept me busy, and my responsibilities increased when I took on a lead role in a new development downtown. It was a welcome distraction, allowing me to channel my energy into something productive. But even though I kept busy, I often found myself looking back, wondering how things had spiraled so far from the life I'd envisioned. Friends and family were a constant source of support. My parents, especially, were there for me through every up and down. I stayed with them for several months, regaining my footing and rediscovering who I was outside of my marriage to Emily. I realized I had a lot of life left to live, and that my future didn't have to be defined by the heartbreak I'd endured. One Saturday morning, as I was sipping coffee on my parents' porch, my mother sat down beside me, a gentle smile on her face. Will, she began, you've come a long way these past few months. I know it hasn't been easy, but I can see you healing. I nodded, feeling the truth of her words. It still hurts sometimes, but it's different now. I'm starting to feel like myself again. She placed a comforting hand on mine. That's all any of us can ask for. Take things one day at a time. And remember, life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Her words stayed with me as I moved forward, gradually finding joy in the small, everyday moments. I began to reconnect with friends I hadn't seen in a while and even took up new hobbies. I joined a local hiking group, venturing out into the nearby trails and taking solace in the natural beauty around me. The fresh air, The challenge of a steep climb, the camaraderie with new friends, it all reminded me that there was still so much to experience, even after loss. Eventually, I moved into a small apartment in downtown Raleigh. It was modest and nothing like the home Emily and I had shared, but it was mine, a fresh start in a place that felt entirely my own. I filled it with things that reflected my personality: photos of family, a guitar I was trying to teach myself to play, and books I'd always meant to read. Bit by bit, I was building a life that felt genuine, free from the shadows of the past. One evening, a few months after moving into my apartment, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, I answered, only to be met with a familiar voice. "Janet, the wife of Emily's former lover." "Will," she said, her voice soft and measured. "I know this might seem out of the blue, but I wanted to reach out. I found out about David and Emily a while back, and, well, I know what you've been through." There was a moment of silence, and I took a deep breath. "Thanks, Janet. I'm sorry you had to go through that too. It's not easy." "No, it's not," she agreed, a trace of sadness in her tone. "But I wanted to tell you that it gets better. I've started over, and while it was hard, I'm finally beginning to feel whole again." Her words, unexpected yet reassuring, resonated deeply with me. We spoke for a while, sharing our experiences, and by the end of the call, I felt a newfound sense of closure. Knowing that someone else had come through a similar ordeal reminded me that healing was possible, that life, despite everything, could be rebuilt. As the seasons changed, so did I. I grew stronger, more confident, and more willing to open myself to new possibilities. I began to feel a stirring of hope, a realization that the pain of the past no longer held the same power over me. One evening, at a mutual friends gathering, I met someone, Sophie, a bright and compassionate woman who'd recently moved to Raleigh for work. We connected instantly, our conversations filled with laughter and an easy sense of understanding. Unlike before, there were no grand gestures, no whirlwind romance. With Sophie, things were simple, grounded in friendship and mutual respect. We took things slowly, enjoying each other's company without the weight of expectations. She knew about my past, and I knew about hers. Both of us had faced heartbreak, and both of us understood the value of patience and trust. As time went on, we grew closer. She became a part of my world, accompanying me on hikes, sharing quiet evenings at home, and encouraging me to pursue my dreams. Sophie brought warmth and kindness into my life, reminding me that love didn't have to be complicated to be genuine. One evening, as we sat together on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, she took my hand, her gaze warm and steady. "I know this might sound forward, Will," she said, a gentle smile on her lips, "but I just want you to know, whatever the future holds, I'm grateful to be here with you." Her words filled me with a sense of peace, and I realized that, for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. I had come through the darkest chapter of my life and found a new beginning on the other side. Emily's betrayal was a wound that had once defined me, but now it was simply a memory, a part of my past, but not my future. As I sat there with Sophie, the city stretched out before us, I felt a quiet certainty settle within me. Life had moved on, and so had I. The heartache, the anger, the bitterness, they had all faded, replaced by a sense of gratitude for the lessons I'd learned and the resilience I'd found. In the end, I hadn't just survived, I'd grown. I was no longer defined by the pain, but by the strength I gained in overcoming it. With Sophie by my side, and a future that felt full of possibility, I was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead.